Thanks very much. It's been called an unprecedented move, the Prime Minister's release of his tax returns in response to speculation about his family finances. But is it enough to silence the opposition? Well, the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, is here. And a very good morning to you, Mr McDonnell. Well, first of all, this from Angus Robertson saying, well, it's moving on now to the Cabinet and in particular the Chancellor. Would you like to have a look at his tax affairs?
Well, I published my own. Some months ago, and I think actually it's quite a good standard to set. In other European countries this happens, and I think people now want a sort of openness and transparency. So it's up to individuals at the moment, but I think the system should be changed so that certainly those who are taking the cabinet or shadow cabinet decisions, I think it's quite important that people are open.
But in particular, the Chancellor, when he's dealing, you're shadowing him when he's dealing with issues like British overseas territories. He's setting the law, he's changing the law. He's meant to be chasing down the tax avoiders.
When I published mine, I said I did this on a voluntary basis because a journalist simply asked me the question. I said yes, I will. But when I did mine, I said actually, if you are dealing with particularly financial matters and if you're dealing with the taxation system, it's best to be open and transparent. And as I say, it happens in other countries, so I don't see a problem with it. And I think people should just get on and do it now.
But I mean, well, your leader was saying this morning that it should be compulsory for people in public life, particularly MPs. I think all MPs should just publish tax returns.
That system works elsewhere perfectly well. And I think now that the general public are really concerned about the fairness of the taxation system, so I think, yes, it would set a good standard for us all.
Well, I've got your tax return here. Just want to ask you a couple of questions about it. I mean, there's not much in there apart from your MP's salary. You don't give any money to charity.
Well, I do, but I don't claim any tax.
Okay, you don't claim the tax. Well, it would be tax efficient for them, as I'm sure the charities would tell you. Yeah. But it's this, you've got a pension, haven't you, from Westminster Council, £14,000 plus. Did you take a tax-free lump sum when you accessed that?
No, I don't think there was a tax-free lump sum with that.
There wasn't an option, because that equates to something like a £300,000 pension.
No, there wasn't a tax-free lump sum. I don't believe that was available. It's a local government scheme, and I'm 64 now, so I qualified for it. I paid into it in the normal way, so I declared it. And what you'll see from my tax return, what I have is my MP salary and my local government pension.
Yeah, but I'm just asking about the tax. You know, the very legitimate ways, the ways that the government encourages and Labour administrations in the past have to avoid tax for people who are safe. Have you got ISAs as well? I mean, these are tax.
I've got one small ISA, I think £5,000 or something like that now. But again, I think that's what we're saying is, if it's open and transparent, and an ISA, for example, is to encourage people to save, it's perfectly proper. So I don't see any problem about being completely open and transparent about all those matters. If you're a politician at a senior level making decisions on taxation, what people are concerned about is the fairness of the system.
It's wider than that, though. Just on what Mr Corbyn said this morning. He just said everyone in public life. He was even suggesting that perhaps journalists that ask you lot questions should publish things. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think I would like it to be as open and transparent as possible. Jeremy started the debate on that now, and I think that's going to be really useful. But as a first step, I think actually with senior politicians, I think voluntarily now they should do it anyway.
And what about your colleague, your senior colleague, of course, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Hilary Benn? We know that when his father passed, and a lot of Mr Cameron's affairs were about inheritance, when Tony Benn passed away, there was a very, very expensive house in Holland Park that he passed on to his family, and it seems that there were legal devices used by the family to mitigate tax. Do you think you would encourage Mr Benn to publish his tax affairs?
I think anyone now, my own view is this, anyone at a senior level in politics who are making decisions or potentially making decisions, Shadow Cabinet for example, about the taxation affairs of our country, it's better to be completely open and transparent. It's voluntary at the moment, but I'd like to see a system, as I say, it operates in other countries. I don't see why it doesn't here.
But people asking these specific questions about Hilary Benn, you'd say, Hilary, get on with it and show us what happened.
It's up to the individual concerned, but I think it's best to be open and transparent.
And now I want to ask you about this, Seema Malhotra, your colleague in the Shadow Treasury team there. Writing today, she's saying, and this is on Mr Cameron, even now we don't know if he's telling the full story. What are the Labour Party's concerns?
We haven't seen the full tax returns yet. All he's done is publish a summary from his accountant, so it's not the publication. You said earlier he's published his tax returns. He hasn't done it altogether, really. I think the question, I don't want to personalise this around David Cameron, but what worried people is he was asked a straight question a week ago, And you expect from your Prime Minister automatically a straight answer. We didn't get that. And it's taken us a week to get this far, to get this amount of information, and we still haven't had the full tax returns. So I think people are still querulous about what is the exact position itself. People are asking questions today about the inheritance that he's had as well. £300,000 from his father, just below the inheritance tax limit of the 325. Then 2 lump sums of £100,000 from his mother, which takes his inheritance then to £500,000, and he never paid any tax on it whatsoever. Now again, there's an issue here that people are saying, look, there's one law for the rich, there's another for the rest of us.
He just happens to be rich. I mean, it's entirely within the law. Are you suggesting that anything untoward has gone on?
No, not at all. But what people are saying, is the system fair? And shouldn't we review the system to see if it is fair? As I say, he never paid a penny of inheritance tax on that. And the government now is cutting inheritance tax. The reason people are asking questions whether it's fair enough, I'll just give one example. At the same time in the budget, they're cutting inheritance tax. At the same time, they were cutting benefits for disabled people by £30 a week. People just don't think that's fair, and that's not the way that I think they'd like to see our system operate.
And just on the Prime Minister then, would you like to go further back as well and find out about offshore trusts and offshore investment vehicles, whether he's had investments in the past? I mean, his father set up the fund a long time ago.
I think it's better for him to be completely open and transparent over that period. The other thing that I think people are asking questions about, which is, again, policy, not personality. At the same time as we were campaigning, and I've been campaigning on this for the last 15, 20 years, same time as we were campaigning, we had a real victory about registering beneficiary interests in companies. He was blocking in Europe the registration of interests in trusts. And again, that's not open and transparent, that he was proclaiming he was about. That isn't what he was actually doing. I want to ask you a lot more.
Legislation. I want to ask you a lot more about overseas dependencies and Crown territories. But just on this trust, Blair it was called. And of course, that resonates with people in terms of a former leader of your party, who now we understand is very, very rich indeed, arranges his tax affairs, I'm sure, entirely legally, but of course lives in many different jurisdictions around the world. Do you think Tony Blair's image and Tony Blair's wealth is damaging to your party?
It's not about the wealth as such, about individuals. You know, you can have wealthy people. It's whether the system is fair in terms of taxation. If they're paying their taxes fairly, that's fine, and legally, that's fine. But I think we're into a really moral discussion now about whether our taxation system really is fair, and is it actually creating a society that's so unequal?
Sorry, Shadow Chancellor, the specific question about Tony Blair, former leader of your party. Of course, you're in entirely new leadership now, but in the public's mind, they're saying, well, there was a Labour leader who, after he left office, has made an awful lot of money and arranged his tax affairs accordingly, we think.
I don't know about his tax affairs. He's certainly made a large amount of money. What he does with that money, I'm not sure. He might well be using it for good purposes. I don't know. This isn't about people being rich or people just being on average wages. This is the system treating everybody fairly? The system isn't treating people fairly. That's the general view at the moment, particularly if you can use various tax devices to avoid paying tax on quite a large scale. That isn't open to the ordinary person who goes to work, pays the PAYE. So that's why the system needs to be reformed.
OK, well, and the irony of this is, of this system, many of the territories that allow this to happen are, of course, the relationship with the UK. What would you do to the British overseas territories and their ability to offer these kind of tax?
Well, I think we've got to enforce a standard upon them of openness and transparency, and tax regimes within their territories that are fair as well and that reflect what we want in this country as well. And if they don't abide by that, my own view is that we should take action against them. And if they themselves, who are largely supported by the UK, if they want to go independent, that's up to them. But to be frank, the OECD would most probably list them and blacklist them as tax havens anyway. So it is better for them to cooperate with the UK government, have openness and transparency, register the interests of people that hold their wealth within those territories, and pay appropriate levels of tax.
So it goes for Crown dependencies, goes for the Isle of Man, goes for the Channel Islands.
Yes, I think we've got to try and get agreements now internationally and globally about fair taxation. We've been campaigning for that in Europe, so that the least we can do is make sure those that have a relationship with Britain should operate effectively and fairly as well.
This from former Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott this morning, Lord Prescott. He says to me, the British Virgin Islands and the Isle of Man and other British overseas territories that promote their aggressive offshore status are nothing but parasites.
Well, I have to say this, that some of these territories have actually used our services, been supported by this government, by successive governments, by the UK, even received aid, some of them, and at the same time they're allowing their territories to be used as tax havens. I don't think the British public think that's fair, and I think it has to be tackled. That's one of the issues we're saying to the government that they need to get on with quickly now. We're calling for an inquiry now into Panama and into all these aspects of it, but we want that inquiry to be public and independent. The government's setting up an inquiry, but it's reporting to the Home Secretary and the Chancellor. Now, they're politicians from a political party whose donors have actually benefited from the system, so it's hardly independent. We also need to have the HMRC properly resourced, stop the cuts, make sure the tax collectors are properly resourced to be able to undertake this inquiry.
But parasites?
Well, I'm afraid if they're taking money from us, if they're enjoying our protection and they're using the name of Britain as well, and at the same time they're operating as tax havens, denying tax resources to our public services, I can understand why John has gone that far.
Going to be talking to the First Minister of Gibraltar, one of these parasites, as Mr Prescott and it seems Lord Prescott, you've termed them now. I mean, there is an answer, a specific answer with Gibraltar, given the dispute with Spain, is hand them over.
Well, that's not what the people there want. If they want a relationship with Britain, though, they should play fair. Everybody who wants a relationship with Britain should play fair. That means openness, transparency, proper register of interests and proper taxation levels. They cannot be used to salt tax away from this country. And every penny that goes in tax avoidance and tax evasion means a lack of investment in our NHS, lack of investment in education and our public services, and also in benefits to those that really need them within our country. It's not fair, it's not acceptable.
And what are your views? I mean, we've been talking about, the high end, about overseas trusts and all those kind of things that most people in the country haven't got a clue what they are and whether they can access them or not. But of course, there is tax avoidance and tax evasion that takes place on a grand scale, but at a low level every day on the streets, building sites and houses of Britain. As you know what I'm going to talk about, is the cash in hand economy, the black economy. What would you say to people, for instance, that voted to you, who get a small job done around the house and the tradesperson says, well, it'll cost you 20% less if you pay cash?
Well, it's not legal. It's just not legal, and people just have to abide by the law. Whatever level it is, I'm afraid you have to abide by the law.
So what's that? You have to ask for a receipt and ask if you're VAT registered?
Well, I'm afraid so. You have to abide by the law. And the issue for us at the moment is the vast bulk of our population. We're not losing, on all the estimates, we're not losing billions of pounds as a result of the odd cash-in-hand payment, although we need people to abide by the law.
Well, the estimate is that billions are going in the black economy.
Well, not in comparison with what's going on in tax evasion and tax avoidance on an industrial scale in this country. It pales into insignificance. But nevertheless, what we're saying is people need to abide by the law, and the law has to be fair.
Last dimension of this, and it's something that you've talked about, I suppose, in another way in the past, it seems that a lot of big banks, British-based banks, some of them have been involved in the Panama Papers, have been named in the Panama Papers, in using this legal firm to facilitate their clients setting up certain trusts, so kind of deflecting it. So they need looking at.
Yes, we've included, this week we're publishing our plan for tackling tax evasion and tax avoidance and enforcing it effectively, and that means also banks being open and transparent about the register of their interests as well, and how they use these tax havens. And again, it does need an independent inquiry into this whole system now. I'd also like to strengthen the powers of whistleblowers, because we wouldn't have known anything about this unless there was leaks going on. What we need to do is strengthen the power of whistleblowers. Can I say also, with regard to the register of interest with MPs as well, at the moment there is a register of interest, but there's levels about how much you actually declare if you've got money in overseas trusts. We want that reviewed as well. So there's complete openness and transparency about individuals, companies, trusts and banks as well. In that way, we may be able to restore the faith in our taxation system.
Mr McDonnell, great talking to you. Shadow Chancellor, thank you very much indeed. John McDonnell there, and you are watching Murnaghan on Sky News.